Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Todd Stottlemyre. Todd, welcome to the show. Welcome to become your own superhero.
I love it, boss. I love it. Let's do this, man.
Just for the people at home that are only listening to this, we both raised baseball bats, and this was not planned either. This was not planned. And I think it shows a really great kindred spirit between the love of cricket that I have and the love for baseball that you have all the way over in what I can only assume you're in Canada.
Yeah. So I got a chance to play in Canada. It was pretty phenomenal. And I got to tell you, Laban, the funny thing is I was like, I was going to surprise you with my bat, and then you were going to surprise me with it. And it was like, it's just hilarious. But, we had some great conversations offline, and that really led to this podcast. I got to tell you, I'm so humbled and honored, and I love your story. I love your heart. I love what you're doing. I love how you're taking something you had to overcome from your past and really making it the message for your future. So I applaud you, sir. It's an honor for me to be here. So I would tell you that I'm humbled. So.
Well, Todd, I must say, mate, thank you so much. I really feel like it's a huge honor from mine as well. Brian Heathman, the wonderful Brian Heathman, who was a guest on the show, made the introduction through the work that you and him have done together in publishing not one, but two books, one that came out officially on the 25th of January, 2020, The Observer, which we will talk about in a little bit of detail. But for people that don't know who Todd Stottlemyre is, I'll just give you a little bit of a synopsis because this is a pretty amazing story. So Todd's our very first Major League Baseballer on the podcast, hopefully not our last. You are a high-performance business coach, keynote speaker, business owner, investor. You're on the board of many companies. You're involved with the multi-level marketing business side of things as well. You've got 5 daughters.
So I have 4 daughters and 1 son.
Sorry, 4 daughters and 1. I couldn't find the 5th name because you got Molly, Ava, Brooklyn, Rachel.
Yeah.
And
it goes Rachel is the oldest, and then Madison, and then Ava, and then my son is TJ, and then my youngest daughter is Brooklyn.
TJ, there you go. And your beautiful wife, Erica?
Erica, correct. Yes.
And you got a pretty cool story, Todd, I got to admit. And I wanted to start off with something a little bit unusual, and I hope you don't mind me playing this, but I want to explore this. I'm just going to play the audio for our audience at home. I haven't prepared Todd for this, so just bear with me. Are you able to explain to our audience what's going on there?
What was there? 1995. And, I'd gone through some serious mental mindset work, controlling your emotions, year or 2 in advance of that outburst, oddly enough. And I was a pitcher with the Oakland A's. And, it was so funny because it was my first year with the A's, and here I was, this emotional pitcher, and yet day in, every time I pitched, it was just very kind of like normal, no big emotions, no outbursts. And I think that, they were kind of like, what's going on with this guy? We've watched him from afar, and he was always very emotional, and he seemed so like poised and in control. Well, I'd done a lot of work up to that point, but this particular game was right at the mid-season mark. It was the last game before the All-Star break. And we had just lost 3 straight. We were in second place, and we had just lost 3 straight to the Brewers. And now I'm pitching the final game of the first half against the Brewers. And we happened to be winning 2-1 in the bottom of the 8th inning with 2 outs. And I throw a 2-2 slider. I throw a 2-2 slider to a guy, and he kind of check swings, and the home plate umpire calls him out for the third out. I'm walking off the mound. There was a runner on second base, so the inning's over. Walking off the mound, and the Brewers dugout is yelling, check him, check him. So then the home plate umpire asks the guy at first base, and he says, no swing. And then all of a sudden it's like, here we go. So I come back out on the field, and then I throw a 3-2 fastball, and the guy hits a double in the gap. So now the score is 2-2. Next guy up is BJ Suroff. I throw him a pitch. He hits a double in the gap. So now they go ahead 3-2. I get the last guy out. I then pitch the ninth inning and get it out. So it was kind of like we had lost. There was a lot of frustration. We had lost 4 straight. We were in second place. We were going into the All-Star break. And then, things in the 8th inning didn't work out our way, the calls we wanted and this and that from the umpires. And then it turned into a loss. So the reporter that asked me the question, it was like the game just gotten over. So there's reporters everywhere, mics everywhere in front of me. And the guy says, Todd, he says, do you think that you potentially lost your emotions and that cost the A's a game? And I looked up at him. I was sitting in my chair. I had ice all over my arm. I looked up at him, and I'm like, I'm not answering that. Next question. Next guy asked another question. That same exact guy goes, Todd, he says, did you lose your emotions on that call that the umpire made, and did that cause you to lose the game? So it was the second time he'd come at me. And then I was like, you want to see me lose my emotions? And then I just lost it. And, it was crazy because, when you lose it on the media, and we were in Oakland, so it was our home team and our home media and all that. But when you lose it that way, one or two things are going to happen. They're going to either say, wow, this guy really cares, and they're going to respect it, or I'm going to just get annihilated in the media, right? And I don't know which way it's going to go. And I'm prepared for either way it goes. I'm prepared because I was passionate about that play, losing 4 straight, the whole thing. And it just turns out that the next day, they all over the talk shows, all over the newspapers in the Bay Area, they were like, oh, the Oakland A's have found their leader, their emotional leader, their spiritual leader, and it was like, I'm like, oh, thank God, right? Because if it goes the other way, then it seems like it continues. But so I was lucky that it all worked out. But I can't believe you came up with that. Where did you find that, man? You know what's funny about that? I'll tell you what's funny about that clip. After that, all season long, it didn't matter, coast to coast. So like up in Seattle, they would say, hey, it's raining again in Seattle. I wonder what Todd Stottlemyre thinks of that. And then they would press play and it's going crazy, right? So, and it was just hilarious because a lot of the news, radio, talk show, they were having a blast with it. And I was like, well, there you go. So cool stuff, man.
Well, I'll happily send you the link. Someone's been able to convert it from an old audio onto YouTube. But the thing that struck me about listening to that, Todd, and having done a bunch of reading and I like to know information about people in general, not just because they're on the podcast. I've always been a curious soul. And what struck me after our initial conversation, the research I was doing, is the childhood that you had, because I talk a lot on this podcast about my own experience as a child of divorce, but yours, from all accounts, your father was a wonderful Major League baseballer. Your brother is as well, and you had loving parents, but you had a major trauma happen when you were 15 that I'd love for you to share with our audience if you can. That when I heard that rant, I heard the pain of a 15-year-old boy come through that. And I'm just curious to know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm 15 at the time. My little brother Jason is 11, and he was on his 3rd bout of having leukemia, blood cancer. And the doctors came to our family and they said, his only real chance for a long life would be to get a bone marrow transplant. And so all the entire family, we all tested our blood, and the doctors did all of this. And I happened to be the perfect match. So I was the chosen one to give him a bone marrow transplant. So Did that, of course. And then eventually what happened was, as my marrow entered in his body, the first reaction was everything seemed to be going well. But then he took a detour, and literally he was 2 days from being released from the hospital. And he took a massive detour and went into a coma. And then eventually, you know, his life was taken. So that marrow, my bone marrow, actually, his body had rejected it, put him into a coma, and then eventually we lost him. And I got to tell you, you know, it was crippling, and as a family, and for my mother and father, I think, you know, I can't imagine, you know, having to bury your 11-year-old son. But, you know, there's listeners today, and this is so important, and I appreciate you asking this question, because someone went through, or some parent went through a similar situation, or maybe, you know, a brother of a brother went through a similar situation. But, you know, we were terribly sad, and it was tragic, and it was heartbreaking, all those things that you can imagine. But there were two other emotions I left that hospital with. Number one, hate. I like literally hated the world. And because, you know, I'm 15, he's 11, and now he's gone. And then the other emotion, it was like the guilt was overwhelming and had just taken over my body. And I was like, it was my marrow that put my little brother into a coma. And it didn't matter what anyone said. When you're 15 and you know your marrow and his body didn't accept and go into a coma, anybody can tell you that anything. They can say, hey, Todd, it's not your fault. They can say whatever you want, but I took all of that on. And because I took it on, what really happened was, you know, it got to be a thing that every time, because I wasn't in control of that situation. So moving forward, when I wasn't in control of something, so you think about that outburst, and I wasn't in control of the umpire saying no swing, you know, and what would happen is when I wasn't in control of something and things didn't go my way, the hate and guilt that I has buried and really truly rewired myself to believe, because I played it over and over and over in my head. And as I'm buying this, then it becomes who I am when the chips are down. So what would happen is in the heat of a moment, and this guilt and this hate could come out of you and truly, I call it, ruining and destroying the mastery of the present moment. And I say to many folks, I said, listen, I lived in a prison that I built. I built the prison. It was my own prison. It was a prison of unforgiveness. It was a prison of hate. It was a prison of guilt, and it was controlling me. And it really wasn't until 1993, you know, after we just won our second World Series. And you think, man, it's like, you look at me from the outside and it's like, geez, this guy's lived out his childhood dream. He's making millions of dollars. He's now a 2-time world champion. Like, he's got everything, you know? And but what people didn't understand was, when I looked in the mirror, I could not stand the person looking back at me, because I was on the inside of me. On the outside, I looked great. On the inside of me was hate, was guilt, was anger, was unforgiveness. I was living, man, I was dark. But I also realized I didn't like that outburst. I didn't like my response to stimulus. And I was like, and I kept ending up in the same place. Anger, guilt, all flowing out of me, eruptions, blackouts, all these things. And I was like, I'm tired of it, man. I'm tired of being that person. And so I was at a place where I'm like, I want help. I need help, but I want it, because I want to change, because I don't like these outcomes. And I reached out to this guy. His name is Harvey Dorfman. He was the guru and mindset of baseball. He wrote The Mental Game of Baseball. And I called him. I said, Harvey, I said, this is Todd Stottlemyre. And he said, I've been waiting on your call. I was like, dude, I didn't even know you knew who I was, you know, whatever. And I said, man, I said, Harvey, I'm struggling. He goes, I know. And we booked a meeting. And that meeting was supposed to last a couple hours. And that meeting went 12 hours in a hotel room. And in the first hour, he asked me this question. He said, Todd, he says, would you do it all over again? I said, Harvey, would I do what all over again? He said, would you give a bone marrow transplant to your little brother all over again? And I was like, man, I do it every minute. I do it every second of every minute of every hour of every day. I do it over and over. And he said to me, he said, Todd, didn't you already do that? And I said, yes. He said, Todd, he says, can I ask you a question? He says, did you do everything you could possibly do? And I said, yes. He said, Todd, he says, you didn't kill your little brother. He said, you're not God. It is out of your control. He says, you did everything you could humanly possible for you to do. And I said, yeah. And I just broke down, man. I bawled like a baby. And it's emotional to even think about that moment right now for me, because like it just broke me. And he said to me, let it go. And for the first time since that event, no one had really given me permission to release it, to understand that I did everything. It was almost like this whole new, and I would tell you, I just broke. And then in the last hour of our meeting, he said to me, I want you to do something. I want you to go on a 7-day. He says, will you do a 7-day challenge? I said, of course, 7-day challenge. I said, I got that, Harv, no big deal. I said, what's the challenge? He says, you're not allowed to react or respond to any thought you have or any emotion you have over 7 days. So if something starts to aggravate you, frustrate you, he says, all I want you to do is observe your thought and observe your emotions, and you're not allowed to react. You can only document how you're thinking and how you're feeling. And in 7 days, what we're going to do is we're going to build a tool chest, a toolbox. And in that toolbox, it's going to be a way for you to overcome frustration, anger, all this hate, and be able to stay in peak performance, not only as an athlete, but as a human being. I got to tell you, I was so excited. And that was 1993, in the winter of 93. And Laban, that was the making of this book, The Observer, of trying to get people to understand that, step away from themselves and ask themselves this question, and become clear and have clarity and awareness. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts? And because thoughts will drive emotions, and then emotions will drive thoughts. If you wake up and you don't feel good, pretty soon your mind is telling you don't feel good, right? And it's like, so they kind of go hand in glove. And I was at war. I was at war with this hate, this guilt, this unforgiveness, this crazy way of thinking and feeling and anger. And here's what I'd tell people today. And it's the reason I wrote the book, The Observer, was so people can understand that, hey, look, from the outside, it looked like I had it all, but on the inside, I had nothing, because I was lacking love, joy, I was lacking happiness. Man, I was dark, dude. And being dark, it doesn't matter what you have in the outer world. When you're dark on the inside, you have nothing, man. You're trapped. And I wanted people, this book is my message to saying, hey, if you feel that way, if you haven't, maybe you're hanging on to some unforgiveness, maybe you're hanging on to some guilt, maybe you're hanging on to a childhood, maybe you're still playing victim to how you grew up, maybe this, maybe that. What I'm saying is, listen, I've been there, and there's a way out, and there's a way to a better life. So I know that's a mouthful, but it's like, it's really become my life mission to continue to coach myself on a daily basis, because it's easy to get trapped and fall prey to a certain situation. I look at the world, man, and we talked about this. If you look at the world in 2020 and you look at COVID-19, you look at the race wars we've been having here in the United States, if you look at politics, and you look at people's response to just those three things, it's like, look at the hate that people are messaging around the world on social media. And that hate isn't COVID. It's not politics. It's not, I don't even believe it's race, but here's what I think it's something coming from within that you're reacting, and it's giving you an excuse to act a certain way on the outside. And it's not, by the way, that's not okay, you know, and I wasn't okay with me with how I responded. So that's a mouthful.
Well, Todd, it's I mean, thank you for sharing that. It's it beggars belief, really. And I have a thought just based on what you were saying there, something that I've spoken about publicly as well. And I've run this past some of the other guests that I've had that are experts in the medical side of nutrition and that kind of thing, treating ketogenic diets. And a quick scroll through of the people that you follow on Instagram, there's some lots of similarities. I know you're a fan of Jason Fung and a bunch of other people, right? But I fundamentally believe that as the Western world in particular is getting fatter and sicker, which is all pretty much the direct relation to improper diet and the way things evolved over the last 100 or so years, is that people are becoming more and more deeply unhappy. And the only reason I say that, Todd, was because that was me. Yeah. And it's only when I've been able to switch that around and focus on proper nutrition, which allows me to be better at the other areas of my life, mindset, discipline, you know, goal setting, education. And it's a really important point that you bring up. And I suppose my next question to you is that amazing emotional release that you had, I'm guessing that wasn't the only one that you had from that point on. I'm guessing you've had a bunch since.
Yeah. So like I say, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? And what I don't want people to think is like a 1-day meeting with my guy and I was cured. Look, from the event, the tragic event in 1981, it was 12 years later. So for 12 years, I had been wiring my mind and my heart with that event and the guilt and hate from it. You're not going to unwind 12 years of going through this in 1 day. And it's going to take time. But here's the beauty. Here's what I love, is that we created this tool chest and these tools and these principles and these models that when it did happen, it didn't have to live with me for a week or a month. And it's like when something happens and you're disappointed, it's like you carry that baggage, right? I was learning to let go. And I was understanding it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. It's okay to not be in control. It's okay. And the tools, then if I got emotional and it happened, I could go back to peak performance a very short time later. And the reason why is because we created these tools, and I would identify, and I would create awareness and clarity, like, this isn't the place I want to be. I need to get out of this place. And one of the tools is the 180-degree mindset. And it's kind of like, what's the 180-degree mindset? It's like, it's taking a negative thought and replacing it 180 degrees from that negative place to a positive place. You know, it's kind of like, hey man, I feel like crap, or man, I'm having a crappy day. And it's like, hey man, instead of I'm having a crappy day, how about, hey, this is a great day because of all my setbacks and all my fallen today, that I've been able to learn so much, and it's going to be so valuable that I'm going to actually be better tomorrow. That's a different perspective. And it's a 180-degree different perspective. So we came up with a 180-degree mindset. Now, but you can do that with everything. It's like, man, I don't feel well. No, time out, Todd. Stop that thinking. Stop that feeling. It's like, man, I feel great. Listen, you can start talking yourself into a different peak performance. You said something so valuable, man, and I can't let it go. So I want to go back to it. You talked about your health, nutrition, fitness, these things, and people getting sick and overweight and getting disease. I always tell people, I said, listen, if you don't take time to be healthy, you're going to have to take time to be sick. It's like, it's no fun. It's no fun getting disease. And, you know, there's a lot of science out, and I don't want you to take my word for it, but there's a lot of science out there, and everyone can do their own research, that a 30-minute walk, an intentional walk every day, will fight off 50% of fatality type diseases that could possibly attack your body. Aren't you worth 30 minutes a day of some exercise? Of course we are. But like Jim Rohn once said, what is simple to do is simple not to do. It takes discipline. It talks just what you said. It takes discipline, man. It takes commitment. It also takes somebody saying, I want to change. I want to be healthy. I want to be fit. And because you give it something, what I call, you give it enough meaning, you know, and when you start stacking enough meaning, you can create change, you know? So anyways.
Man, it's a really wonderful point. And you know, one of the things that I think may have been able to help your own situation was, you know, your elite level of fitness. Because if you'd gone through what you'd gone through and been unhealthy as well, there's probably a high probability that you wouldn't be here today, probably from removing yourself from the gene pool.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts on that are. I don't know whether you thought about suicide at any point after that whole experience with your brother.
You know, I didn't, but I didn't get to the point where, you know, my life wasn't worth it. I didn't actually think about my life. I didn't actually think about, man, I'm living and he's gone. I was more focused on playing victim to a circumstance I couldn't control and being so hateful that he was gone. I was so hateful that it controlled, it controlled me. It was so controlling. And
who were you most angry at?
You know, I remember, man, and I hated God at the moment. And you know, today, you know, we're spiritual people and we live a Christian life and so I guess I'm okay. I feel like it's okay for me to say this, but I hated, and my thought was, man, God, it's like, how could you do this? How do you allow this to happen? Right. And I started to blame, and I started to like, you know, I'm so grateful that I didn't take a different road. I didn't take a road to drugs and alcohol, that I didn't take a road to suicide. I'm lucky, you know, because the unlucky ones go down those different roads and then it becomes a whole look, I could have compounded the problem, right? And so, and I also got to a point where I had enough awareness around that it wasn't right what I was doing. It wasn't right the way I was responding. And I think I wanted to get better so bad. You know, I hated that I did it. I hated that I had these feelings. And as much as I hated having them, I couldn't do it by myself. You know, I needed people that could understand what I was going through. I needed people to help me and give me and provide with me ways out, you know, things to think about. You know, it's kind of like, you know, it's crazy today, but when I start to feel myself get revved up, I'm like, and it's really a form of meditation. Sometimes I'll go to my office, close the door, close my eyes, just get centered with myself, and start focusing on my breathing so I can get away from the crap that's going on in my head. And it's almost like rejuvenate myself. And then when it's like, and I get to the point where I'm like, okay, you get kind of like totally relaxed and you get centered, and it's like, now, and then I always ask myself this question is, what can I do now? What can I do? Not what can I control, but what can I do? And I start focusing on something positive that I can do. You know, look, I'm a person who loves to achieve. I love to achieve. I'm almost a competitor, man. And I've been competing my whole life. So for me, my biggest competition today really is me. You know, it's like I'm competing against my old me every day. And when my old me shows up, man, it's like warning signs go off, and it's like, and it could be, you know, it could be meditating, it could be getting centered, it could be taking a long walk, it could be taking a run, it could be, you know, listening to something positive. And it's like, you know, to get away from those demons, you know. So look, it's a battle. I mean, sometimes, and what's great is the more you go through it, the more awareness and clarity you have of it. So the warning signs start going off, and you start to understand those warning signs. It's kind of like, you know, man, you start to feel like, oh, I don't like this feeling. And it's like, man, I got to get away from this information. Maybe I got to remove myself from a scene. Maybe I got to go put myself in a positive environment. That's the beauty. That's the beauty. And that's what I try to explain in the book is like, it's possible because I did it. It's possible because you did it. And we're here together, brother, in different countries across oceans, that because I almost feel like our spirits in some way, in some form, and our energies have connected that says, there's a way out, man. And it's like, you know, doesn't mean everything's going to be great, because it's not. And I always tell people, get over it. But when it's not great, what's beautiful is you can learn something from it. And because of that, you can get better.
Well, the book is really surprised me, because when I downloaded it on Audible and started listening to it, and I was like, hang on a second, this is a woman's voice, and the main character is a woman. And I was like, what's going on here? And it's been written as like a modern day fable, but based on a true story. And I was curious to know what your reason for writing it in that way was.
Couple reasons. Number one, I could get really vulnerable with some of the things I went through without it being me as a memoir, right? And I could be more vulnerable. I could be more honest with the readers. I could be more honest with the world. And I could take some of those stories, and even though they're not identical, each story represents some truth behind it. And because of that, I could mold it into this story. So as I made the main character a female, it's the furthest thing from me, right? So it's kind of like the only people that understood my storylines weave through these characters, they were like, wow, Todd, I remember when you went through that. But the people who don't know me, they just know that Kat Van Slyke is an entrepreneur that is a driven lady. Her father was in sports, a pitcher for the Blue Jays, became a manager and a general manager. She has a son that wants to follow in her grandfather's footsteps. It's my story, but I just weave it in and out, and I play every character in the book, which is hilarious, because each one of those characters in those scenes, they represent a piece of me, of a story. And it's just, and I got to tell you, it was a blast. It was difficult because like writing is not my mastery. Like I wasn't born to write, but here we are, you know, and it's a way for me to share. But I also wanted to make sure that somebody didn't read my book and say, yeah, easy for him to do, but not me. And here's why. because I didn't want someone to say easy for him to do, because look who his father is. His parents are great parents. He grew up in a great town. He roamed the grounds of Yankee Stadium. Like, this kid, of course he can do. He had the environment. He had the associations. He had the upbringing. And what I didn't want to happen was somebody that didn't have that upbringing, that, just like you said, maybe had divorced parents. Maybe they grew up in a foster home. Maybe they grew up in an orphanage. I want those people. I want to speak to those people. I want them to understand that, yeah, it might be difficult. I understand. But it doesn't mean because of the way I grew up that I didn't go through hell and I didn't go through pain. And it can happen to us all. So I didn't want my book to be an excuse for someone to say, yeah, he could do it, but it doesn't fit where I'm at. You know, so it was really important for me to do it in this fashion and in this form.
And even the dog agrees with you, Todd.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know what? Don't apologize. We love having dogs on the show, and this is the second dog to appear in a podcast in 2 episodes. I forget what breed it was, but the dog was barking in agreement with the other guest, and a guy called Keith Abraham, who you would absolutely love, an Australian keynote speaker, a goal-setting guru, just an amazing human being as well. It makes a lot of sense now that you explain it that way, and I was genuinely curious because I, having read one of the guys that wrote a foreword for your book, Chris Widener, him and Jim Rohn did 12 Pillars and a bunch of other books, which are written in a similar sort of fable, modern day fable. And it's a really entertaining way of telling a story. And I totally empathize with getting people to connect with the story without saying, yeah, easy for you to do. Having written my own book during lockdown last year, it's written about me. And the reason behind that was I've developed this really great tolerance to sharing all of my demons. It's kind of like part of my therapy. And I can only assume that's kind of what you experienced a little bit in your book as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, absolutely, brother. So, you know, I would tell you that, you know, when you don't come maybe from, I don't know how to say this, but maybe when you grow up and you come from less desirable environment, right? I'll say
dysfunction,
you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Now here's the beauty of telling the story as is in your right person to do that story, is because then someone that didn't grow up like that can say, man, if they can do it, where they came from, what they went through, and I didn't have to go through any of that stuff, there's no excuse for me, I can do it. And then that person also speaks to the person that's growing up today, just like maybe they grew up before. And it's like, man, that guy made it out, I can make it out. So it's so important. So it's really, you know, because, you know, the goal, as you say, you know, it's like when we write these books, when we do these, you know, maybe we get a chance to go speak, we get on a podcast. It's like, for me, it is, man, it's every time I get to share, I get to heal, you know, and it's like, and as I'm healing, and my hope is that as I'm healing and as I'm growing in this new life, that along the way, I might touch just one person that maybe is sitting there staring at that bottle of pills, and they're thinking about it's their way out. Or maybe they test the metal of the gun barrel, and maybe they think that's their way out. Or maybe they're thinking about, and they're staring and they're at the top of the building, and they think that by jumping, that's their way out. My hope and prayer is that I can reach and find those broken, and let them know that there's a different way out. that there's another way out. And when you overcome the top of that building, that gun barrel and that bottle of pills, when you overcome, then your life is going to become so valuable to others to serve. And it becomes, your ministry to helping other people. I think about this all the time. And I'm like, and statistically, and I don't even know the accuracy of what I'm getting ready to say, but but if it is accurate, supposedly the chances of us being born was like 1 in 400 million.
Spot on.
Now, if that's accurate, the day we were born, we damn near broke through a world of impossibility. So why stop at birth? Man, everything we deem as impossible can be possible. We just got to do just like at birth. Just keep breaking through those impossible worlds. And it's like, man, I just know that, man, I believe that, I just believe everything's possible, man. If you have enough meaning, and and you can stack enough meaning, and you have enough discipline, and you have enough grit, and you're willing to just keep going and keep fighting the fight, man, everything becomes possible. I laugh at every Olympics, new world records are broken. Everyone. I'm like, how is it that every Olympics, the whole world comes together and someone breaks a world record every time that someone called impossible? And then we get to see it on we get to see it on TV. And in some cases, we get to see it live. We get to see impossible become possible. Man, this should be our everyday. It's like, this is every day, man. This is cool. This is cool. For me, this is like cool stuff. It's like, I tell my kids, and I say, look, there's nothing that you can't do. There's no one you can't become. You can become, right? And it's more about, in our pursuits, it's always more about our growth, who we become, what our message is, what's our ministry, who we serve. And so I don't want to get too far down that road, but man, it's a cool thing.
Todd, have you had an opportunity to go back and apologize to any of your former teammates and your competitors that you got into scraps with during your playing days?
What's funny is my teammates, like, we always had a love affair for the guys that I played with. I was just so grateful. And they seen this guy that was so competitive that would, and would stick up for any teammate and this and that. Now, but there were some guys across the field where some incidences happened and it was, look, my fault or what have you, but I've run into a few over time. And it's funny that because they didn't know me as a person, they only knew me as a competitor. And as a competitor, that hate would show up every time, man. And I used it. So I used it, but it also used me when I took it too far. So I used the hate to create a competitive environment against someone else that I was competing against. The problem was when I went past and I took it too far and off the cliff into, massive explosions. But yeah, I've run into a few guys before. And it's so funny that there's a guy by the name of Charlie Hayes, and we had some scrap. He was with the Giants, I was with the Diamondbacks. Man, we had some scraps, and we exchanged some bad words, to one another, and through media and out on the field, the whole thing. And then I'll see him because he also played for the Yankees. So, I went back, with my mom and my dad and go to some of those reunions with my mother and father. And then I would see him there because he was a member of those Yankee teams. And it was like, hey man, how are you? And it was kind of like, it was almost like that respect. Like, I get it. You were a different person. You were a different animal on that baseball field. And then they kind of get to know you and they're like, man, you know, and it's funny too, is when guys get traded to your team, they'll be like, man, I hated you. And I was like, why? And they're like, man, you're an ass, dude. Like we hated you. And he goes, I can't even believe to say this. He says, but bro, I love you, man, today as your teammate. But playing against you, I hated you. And that I was okay with that because, you know, it was almost like it gave me a little bit of an edge. So.
It's funny. I was in a place called Totranui, which is in the far north of the South Island of New Zealand in 1992 when the Toronto Blue Jays won the World Series. And I don't remember a lot of my youth, Todd, for a number of reasons, usually related to coping mechanisms, as it turns out. But I remember one of the guys that I was camping with, who was an older boy. I was there with my mate at the time and his dad. And he a huge fan of the Toronto Blue Jays, and he had the Toronto Blue Jays cap. And isn't it extraordinary that all these years later, you know, I'm face to face with the guy that was part of the winning team, you know, not on one but two occasions. And I was punching into a search engine before, what percentage of Major League Baseballers win a World Series? And I couldn't find the stat. And I was curious to know whether you know the answer to that and what the percentage would be to win two.
Yeah, I don't know, but I can't tell you how blessed I feel to play on great teams, how grateful I am. But you want to hear something funny and then I got a chance in 2001 to be a part of the Diamondbacks World Championship run. And what's funny is that he'll shut up in a minute.
He disagrees with you, that's all.
He's a 1-year-old golden retriever, and he normally is really quiet, but every time someone comes to the door, he goes crazy. And for some reason on this podcast, someone keeps coming to the door. But in any case, so, you know, to have 3 World Series rings and to be able to share in those teams is pretty crazy. But what's really odd is my father has 5 world championships.
Wow. So
as a family, we have 8 world titles together. Now, I don't say that because I want anyone to be impressed by it. I would just tell you that we're so dang grateful, and we feel so blessed that we got to be a part of a team that was declared a world champion. Man, that's a special thing, man, and it's really cool. And it's like, and it's a team sport, so it's like, you know, it's not an individual. It's not an individual thing. Like, you know, some sports are individual sports, and then what happens is that because of that, there becomes a brotherhood with these teammates forever. And it's so dang special. You know, when you do something that is so hard to do, or you overcome something and you do it with someone else, man, you become connected for life. So, man, it's been an unbelievable run. It's been a blessing. I don't take it for granted. I'm humbled by it. I'm just, it was a cool part of my life, man.
What's next for Todd Stottlemyre?
You know, every day for me is like, I got to find a way to get better, right? You know, one of the questions I ask myself at the end of every day is, I say, is this the best I can do? I'll reflect today on our podcast and I say, and I'll just think back to it. And I was like, man, you know, is that the best I can do? And the beauty of when you ask yourself, is this the best I can do? It's not to be critical. That's not the goal. It's not to be critical. But when you ask the question, is this the best I can do? When you ask yourself a great question, you get yourself a great answer, and it gives me something to work on to tomorrow. You know, I think one of the things I want to share with the audience, you know, before we get to a close too, is one of the things you know, I've been overpaid. I was overpaid in athletics. But what I want people to understand is that I was overpaid, but I never chased money once. See, I always tell people today when they think about wealth, that build your wealth starting with your family. See, because if you don't have a wealthy family, and I'm talking about love, relationship, then you can have all the money in the world and you're still broke, right? And I always tell people that, like, with entrepreneurs, business people, and this and that, I say, hey, listen, and I hear people sometimes and I'll say, well, why do you want to do that? Well, I want to make millions. I'm like, man, you got it wrong. I said, you'll make millions because what you're trying to accomplish, you'll make millions when you pursue being best in the world at what you do. The money will knock down your door. You won't have to look for it. So I'm a big believer today, and you ask me what's next. It's like, I believe in fulfillment. I believe in that there's more than one wealth. I believe there's spiritual wealth, relationship wealth, personal development wealth, life and health and fitness wealth. I believe that there's, family wealth, and of course, money is one of them, but it's only one of my 8. And I just try to keep the right things, but every day is an opportunity to get better.
Well, the great Canadian professor Jordan Peterson says to not compare yourself to anyone else apart from the person you were the day before. And doing some digging, it looks like your wife follows Jordan. And I was curious to know whether you'd ever had any contact with him, or if you know much of Jordan's work.
No, you know what? I don't, but I'll definitely look into it, because I love that. It's like, it's about being our true, authentic self. And I always tell people, stop competing against everyone else. The competition is staring you back in the mirrors. How good can you get? Stop comparing, stop competing, stop trying to, keep up. It's like, man, the excitement is in the journey of authenticity of each person's life, and that journey and being authentic with yourself and creating clarity and awareness around that authenticity is so cool. I told my son just a couple nights ago, he's 15 and he loves baseball, and I said, son, it's like, man, I'm already, you don't want to be like me because I'm already retired and washed up. I said, son, you need to be you and like you and the best version of you, and don't ever worry about me, man. I'm just going to be so damn proud of you. And my father used to tell us all the time, I don't care what you do, just pursue being the best you can at whatever you choose to do. That's the journey, man.
I love that. I love that, Todd. And one of the things that I was curious to explore before we wrap this up, having a good look at some of the people that you're interested in, looks like you've either got an interest in running some marathon or some ultra marathon distances, or you've started dabbling. What's going on there?
Yeah, funny you say that. So you nailed it. What's funny was when I retired from baseball, and I had a beat up hip and everything, but I was like going to challenge myself to compete again. And I was like, man, I'm going to do an Ironman. And I actually started kind of training, running, biking, swimming, and my right hip got so bad, I ended up they had to do some surgery on it, and they had to put a metal plate in there on the femur, and I had all kinds of bone spurs from all the grinding playing Major League Baseball. And I said, well, man, there goes that. And last year, I was like, it just kind of, I read a book, Rich Roll. What is it?
Rich Roll, the ultra marathon guy.
That guy, I read his book. His book inspired me like crazy. And I was like, man, what's this thing? I was like, the Ironman. I said, what's this thing called the Ultraman, right? And I told my wife, I said, hon, I'm going to do the Ultraman. And she's like, what's that? I said, it's like the Ironman on steroids. It's like, it's so much bigger and so much more. And she goes, don't you think you ought to start with the Ironman? and so, but anyways, so I started to be like, man, it would be so cool to start and finish an Ironman. I'm 55. I've had 9 different surgeries, and just to take myself mentally and physically through something else, overcome, to just, it'd be another new experience. And I started looking into it. And then because of COVID, all the Ironmans were getting canceled. And I was like, I wonder if that's a message. And I was like, no, that's not a message. And then on another podcast, I did it with Dr. Greg Wells, and he's an Ironman guy and out of Toronto. And he sent me a message the other day. He goes, hey man, let's do an Ironman in 2022 in Canada. And of course, what did I say? I said, I'm in. I'm in. And I started laughing to myself, and I'm like, the more I say it, then the more I'm going to have to do it, and this and that. But I've never competed any kind of endurance stuff, but so I started pulling up and following Ironman and triathlon. I wanted to, because I'm like, I don't even know how to train, and I don't even know what the first step and what's it look like. So I've had people, actually, it's funny, I've had people sending me different training regimens and stuff like that. But man, I'm going to try it. But I'm not going to do it in Australia because I'm afraid of the sharks, brother.
The chance of you being eaten by a shark is about the chance of you winning 2 or 3 World Series. Probably about the same odds. Today's your lucky day, Todd. I recently interviewed a guy, Andre Abradovich, who is an Ironman coach and an Ironman competitor. He's 57. He's 7% body fat. He's got the best legs on any human being I've ever seen. And he's based here in Australia, but he coaches people all around the world. And I think given your background as well, there's a lot of similarities. I'd be happy to put you guys in touch. But
connect me for sure.
Yeah, he's a machine, right? And he's been recognized as one of the top coaches on the planet. He does a lot of work with Mark Sisson, the Noakes Foundation, Professor Tim Noakes, who was a guest on the podcast, who wrote the book, The Law of Running, which is about ultra running. I'm not sure whether you're aware, I'm a bit of an ultra runner myself. And there's a couple of books that I'd encourage you to read. If you haven't read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins already, listen to the Audible. This is for everyone listening as well, by the way. And then Born to Run by, is it Dean Karnassus?
So Born to Run.
Actually,
I have both those books, and I have listened to Goggins on Audible. It's the coolest way to do an Audible on a book, where he comes in after the chapters and talk. I was like, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. And Born to Run, my wife actually got that book for me. And so that's on my reading list for this year. It's unbelievable you said those.
Because it looks like Jesse Itzler is a friend of yours, or friend of your family. Do you know Jesse?
So I don't know him personally. Actually, my wife has done his Big Ass Calendar Club, and she's been a part of that. And she, matter of fact, she reached out to Jesse and said, hey, listen, my husband is a rock star like you, and she was like, I'm going to send you his new book. And he was like, great, man, send me the book. And, maybe we'll have him as a guest. So it'd be cool to get to know Jesse, because Jesse's a cool guy, man. He's so humble, and he's created some, as far as achievement, right? He's created very high levels of success, but he's so real, man. And I love to see him and all these new experiences. And he's really inspired me and my wife, because of all of his different experiences and different things he's doing and trying things for the first time. So we're like, man, it's like, that's life. Life is supposed to be made up of a whole bunch of experiences. So now it's like every month, what are we doing different? And what's funny is we're going to go trail ride on electric bikes through the mountains up in a place called Castle Rock up here this weekend in Arizona. And I'm like, we've never done it. And it's like, well, we'll throw the helmets on and the pads and just go roll this thing. But new experiences, man, new challenges. And that's pretty exciting.
Well, Jesse paid David Goggins to come and live with him for a month. And he wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
If are you in Phoenix?
I'm in Phoenix. Yes, sir.
Have you ever heard of an ultramarathon runner called Zach Bitter?
I have not.
Okay, so he's someone that you could hire to coach. He's the world record holder for the world's fastest 100-mile, averaging I'm not sure what it is in miles, but it's like 4 minutes something kilometer pace, which I think is like 6 minute 50 miles for 100 miles. And he, like me, is a fat adapted athlete and follows, doesn't take on much carbohydrate at all. And in fact, in December of 2020, I ran a 100-kilometer ultra, which I finished in about 20 hours and 13 minutes. But I did the first 91 kilometers on less than 200 grams of carbohydrate. So that's another option that you can explore as well. Really low impact on the body from being able to reduce the inflammatory response from carbohydrate and sugar, which allows you just to run longer and recover faster. It's pretty amazing. Todd, where can we find you?
ToddOfficial.com.
ToddOfficial.com.
Yeah.
It's an amazing website.
So what's funny is about that is, and I always explain it. I don't know why. Maybe it's my insecurity about being called Todd Official, right? But it's like it started out ToddStottlemyre.com, and no one could spell the last name Stottlemyre. So I said to my wife, I said, we got to come up with something. She goes, just make it ToddOfficial.com. I was like, wow, that was simple. I go, people can figure that one out. So yeah, and then on social media, if you go to the website, you can connect with me from the website into all those social medias and everything like that. So that'd be great.
Yeah, brilliant. And your book is wonderful. Congratulations. I know you got Robin Sharma and Robert Kiyosaki, amongst other, Chris Widener, to write amazing testimonials on your book. Robin wrote the foreword for the book. How'd you manage that?
Yeah. So funny story about Robin is I read Robin's The Monk Who Sold the Ferrari. I read that book years and years ago. And then I was like, man, and I was like, this is so cool. And I was like, and then I started just pulling him up. I said, has he written any other books? And so I started following him. And then I'm like, wow, he's based in Toronto. And I was like, and I just took a chance, man. And one day I emailed him, and I was like, and it was uncomfortable because I was like, hey, Robin, hey man, this is Todd Stottlemyre, and I see you live in Toronto, and I actually pitched for the Blue Jays, and I was just trying to get his attention, and he right away responded. And I thought, nah, that's got to be one of those auto responders, right? And he says, hey, Todd, great to hear from you, or something like that, or whatever. And I'm like, it's got to be an auto responder. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it's not. And I was like, hey, just want to let you know, I've, been reading your books and this and that. And he goes, and he sends him a message back, and he says, hey man, let's take a walk. And I'm like, well, that'd be a tough walk because I actually don't live in Canada anymore, in Toronto. I said, I'm in Scottsdale. And he goes, Scottsdale? He said, or in Phoenix? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you ever been to Tarbell's? He goes, it's my favorite restaurant. I go, wow, that's one of my favorite restaurants here. And I just kind of wanted to tell him thank you, because his books had inspired me, and he gave me some things to think about in my growth and pursuing and trying to get better. And then he invited me out to his Personal Mastery Academy and brought me up on stage and interviewed me, and we've become like friends. Now it's the coolest thing in the world, is because I can text him, and literally he can be anywhere in the world and he'll get back to me. And he's just been a gift, and he's been incredible, an incredible mentor for me in my life. And he's acknowledged both my books, and I put him, his testimony is on the cover of both the books I've written, and we've become close friends. And now his son had just written a book, and he reached out to me. So I'm getting ready to dive into his son's book and read his son's book. So it's a small world, man. And it's like, really cool stuff.
Well, that's a way better story than what I expected. And it was already a pretty damn cool story. Well, I don't know about you, Todd. I think this might be a good place to wrap this up. This has been nothing short of inspirational, but is there anything that you want to leave our audience on?
I would just say that, the first thing that comes to my heart and comes to my mind is we can't forget the golden rule. And, the golden rule is that treat others how you want to be treated. And that doesn't mean you're going to agree with everyone. Things aren't going to always go your way. But if we can, just the spirit of a human being, if we can, just get back to really understanding the golden rule and just simply treat others the way you want to be treated. And, and then the next thing I would say is that, no matter where you're at, and in the ladder of success or in the mountain of success, and maybe you feel like today, man, you're laying on your back and you're in the valley, and I just want you to know that you can do it. And it's going to take courage, and it's going to take you getting back up on your feet and taking a step forward, but it's possible, and that there's a way out, there's a better way, and I want to encourage you to be able to do that today. So, and I would say God bless to everyone, and to you, sir, this connection, man. I feel like you sometimes you meet someone and you break into a conversation. You're like, man, we're going to be friends forever. And that's kind of how I felt with Robin Sharma, and that's kind of, I have that same feeling today. So I can't wait, man, to get to Australia someday and meet you in person.
Well, Todd, it means a huge amount, mate. I just can't applaud you enough for the work that you're doing, and for people listening, 2 books that you got to get down you. The recent one, The Observer, and Relentless Success by the wonderful Todd Stottlemyre.